Brian Pancia is Senior Client Partner for Solutions for Public Sector and Digital Experience at Verizon. Verizon sponsors this edition of the FedGov Today podcast. Brian, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program. What are some of the things that you see agencies struggle with as they're trying to conform to the executive order on CX and deal with some of the other mandates that go across the federal government and also within their own agencies? Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As you mentioned, there's obviously within the federal space, there's a lot of complexities that are in there, but I want to focus on kind of three parts that I'm seeing, not only in the CX space, but across any major project that the government's doing. I've been in this industry working with the federal government for a number of years and working on different projects. And three main things that they see is they always have funding issues. They need to do more with less. So how do we fix that? In the federal government, it's either you're going to do some type of process optimization, or you're going to put technology in place that's going to allow you to work more efficiently. The second piece is people. So you've got contact centers specifically they don't have enough agents to meet the demand of the customer. So what this leads to is these customers are waiting on hold for long times. We've seen average hold times for some of our customers up to 4 hours, which is crazy, where you have customers sitting there waiting and they have no choice. They have to go to the federal government, right? They can't go out and shop other customers out there. If they're working with IRS because of tax related thing, they have to go to IRS. If it's Social Security, they have to go to Social Security. So they're stuck waiting online for hours at a time sometimes. And then the other piece that we're seeing is subject matter experts. The federal government, they're really good at what they do, and we want them to be good at what they do. We want the FBI to be good at catching bad guys. We don't want them to be good at technology and what is coming out down the road 5-10 years from now. So if they're kind of a jack of all trades and they're not doing a good job at what they're supposed to do, and with the FBI that's catching bad guys, and we definitely want them to do that. So they look for industry leaders like ourselves to come in there and really help them out and say, okay, what is going on? Help educate us. We're really smart people. We could piece this stuff together, but we're looking for you for the recommendations. And then the third point is technology. A lot of these agencies are on old, outdated on-prem technology that because the end of life or because of the demand and remote workforce increasing over the years, now they're looking at moving off of that on-prem technology and moving over to more of a cloud solution.
How much of what you're seeing of those three issues tied together is technology-based? Because it strikes me, especially when you think about the legacy technology challenges that you just outlined pretty accurately, I think, I imagine a lot of that's tied to the first one that you mentioned, which is funding. And some of it is tied to the second one that you mentioned, people. So I'm curious about the level of interconnectivity that you see among those three things.
Well, the challenge is obviously funding. We mentioned funding is a big one, right? They have to have the money to buy the technology. They have to make an investment, and they have to make these decisions where do I invest in this old on-prem technology that is kind of aging, and they look at that as kind of technical debt or sunk costs that they have to put in there. Or do I rip off the cloud solutions like a Band-Aid and kind of dip my toe in that water? But it leads to those efficiencies. What makes sense is to kind of take that leap of faith in the cloud technologies because you're almost forced to, or do you look at how do I increase the personnel? But when you go to increase personnel for these contact centers, well, now you got to train them, you got to educate them, and they still, at the end of the day, have to have the tools in place to do their job effectively.
What are some of the ways that agencies are attacking some of these issues using technology to try to make up for the idea of doing more with less and the lack of people, quite frankly, in some cases, to get to all of the constituents, citizens that are asking them to do stuff for them?
That's a great question. I'll give you an example of one of the customers that we work with. I won't name the customer by name, but this customer back in 2022, they answered only 12% of the calls that came in. That is an extremely low amount. I mean, it's crazy. If we had that on the commercial side, those companies would go out of business. But those agencies were answering just 2 years ago, answering a low amount of calls. What we did with this particular agency, we said, okay, we know the hold times, like I mentioned, those hold times sometimes are averaging 4 hours. So we put a voice callback solution in there. And voice callback, I love voice callback. I think it's one of the greatest technologies that has come out over the most recent years. It's so simple that instead of saying, hey, wait on hold for 4 hours, we're going to call you back. We may call you back at either at a scheduled time when you say we could call you back, or we'll call you back within the next 2 hours. And this is great because those customers now, they could go about, do what they want to do, and enjoy their part of the day without stressing out sitting on hold. Because by the time they sit on hold for that 4 hours, now they're aggravated. Their levels are amped up a little bit, and that's going to reflect back on that agent. That agent's going to have to spend that time de-escalating things. So callback has been a great solution. Another solution that we've put in place is what you're seeing, and I kind of refer to as the Alexa of contact centers, where we're putting in natural language IVRs in place, where now these become conversational. We could start to pair common questions that are coming in with answers that are out there, and using AI to start to be generative on that, and make it a lot more interactive with the customers, where the customers could say, hey, I have an issue with this. How can you help me? And it will score its database of all the knowledge that's out there and come up with practical solutions for them, so they don't have to go to that agent now. And they're solving these frequently asked questions very, very quickly. So that agency that was answering 12% of calls this year to date, they're at 88% of calls that they're answering, which is tremendous in just 2 years. Just by putting certain technologies in place, they're seeing that customers are getting seen to, they're getting their problems resolved, and they're happier in the long run.
What are the challenges that agencies like that run into as they're trying to implement new technology? I wonder if it's the new technology itself and the implementation of it, or if it's the way that those technologies interact with stuff that they already have, or the way their people interact with both the stuff that they already have and the new stuff.
Well, there's two big challenges. So I mentioned kind of in the beginning where those agencies don't have the expertise. So there's a lot of education that's going on. You get these agencies that have their process procedures and their checklists in place for on-prem solutions. They don't know what's out there. So now you have to educate them on the deltas or the mappings between the two. What are they getting for cloud versus on-prem? And that education piece is kind of two ways too. So some of the cloud providers, they don't understand the government regulations and stuff that you had mentioned earlier on. So it's educating them why they need things done a certain way. While you got things like FedRAMP that puts these controls and puts some regulations in place for these cloud providers, you still have the agency-specific stuff that's kind of unique. And where that comes into play mostly is what we're seeing in these challenges and these hurdles is with security. So I mentioned FedRAMP, but you've got these unique things where FedRAMP does a really good job at putting that baseline in there, but we still have to focus on that the agency-specific controls that are out there. And that's an education process going back and forth. So these are some hurdles that, while it seems kind of simple, that education process and identifying these security concerns can take a long time.
You mentioned something earlier in the conversation, Brian, that I think is really key when you're talking about subject matter expertise. We want the agency to be really good at whatever its mission is, and it doesn't matter as much if it's not good at some other thing that somebody else can provide for it. One of the big differences I've seen between the time that I came into this space going on 20 years ago and today is not just a recognition of what you described, but a hunger on the part of the federal teams. I had CIO tell me recently, I don't want to be in the data center business anymore. I don't want to be in the cloud business. I don't want to be in any of those things. I want to give that to somebody else and focus on the stuff that only I can do for this agency. And so I wonder if you're seeing that same desire on the part of the federal people to kind of hand this stuff off to you and your colleagues in industry when they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you, I've been in this industry for a long time, and there was that big push, that initiative a while back for the IT optimization initiative. And I worked with several agencies where, exactly like you're describing, they don't want to be in the IT business anymore. They want to. Department of Labor wants to focus on labor. Postal Service wants to focus on postal stuff. So they want to get out of that, and they're looking for us as industry leaders to come out there. And I think what we're finding is it was hesitant for agencies to give up that kind of that trust. They like to keep things in house because they didn't trust people. They wanted to do it themselves because they knew their business better than anybody else. But now, especially with COVID, where it kind of catapulted that cloud technology to the next level, agencies are saying, you know what? This other agency did this. They took that leap of faith. It's worked out for them. We're breaking down those barriers and they're starting to give up, say, okay, we're going to give you this piece of IT. And you see that common where now all these agencies are using Office 365 for all their stuff. You go Teams meetings, Outlook, whatever it is. That was the kind of the first big push into the cloud. And because that was successful, now you're starting to see some of these other technologies come into play.
You mentioned call centers earlier in our conversation, and we talked a little bit before we went on the air about the idea that just about everybody's talking about digital transformation in government, and that's fair, and creating a digital experience. There's a policy from the White House, from OMB, around creating a digital first public experience. But it strikes me that there are still a lot of people, more than I think people think, that like to pick up the phone and call and talk to another human, or at least in the AI age, who they think is another human, and get answers to questions. What's the implication of that for the way that you would like to see agencies thinking about not just call centers, but the CX conversation in general, Brian?
I think with that, it's kind of perception. It's you're used to, and I know with me with some of these technologies, Alexa can't understand me to save my life. No matter what I say to her, she says it wrong, and I have to yell and repeat it over and over again. So when people struggle with these technical solutions, especially when it comes to complex things, they would rather get to a human that could help them out a little quicker. And it's breaking those perceptions down and those barriers where this technology is catapulting, moving quicker and quicker. We're going to start to see where you don't know the difference between talking to a human and talking to a system anymore. Those voices are getting so great. You've got generative AI that's making big strides. Microsoft is putting stuff out like Copilot, where those answers that technology is giving you back is getting better and better and better. So as you start to use this technology and you break down those barriers, you start to build that trust. But right now, you've got people that, they were burned or they're frustrated. And that technology, I know for me, I talk into some of these IVRs and it doesn't understand me. And then you have to go back to the beginning again, hang up, and it's frustrated. I'm like, if I could just get to an agent, I'd be happier. But like we said, those wait times are 4 hours. So that's just going to frustrate you too. But I think it's perception, and we'll slowly but surely break those down.
Not with the federal government, but I have gotten really good at rage hitting zero on a lot of those things that you just described, Brian. It's great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I look forward to more conversations in the future.